They were going to kill her, not quickly, not mercifully. The council had spent 3 days debating how beheading was too honorable for servant trash, burning too wasteful of good wood, and hanging at least provided entertainment. Kael Varen stood in chains before the Duskfall Ridge High Council, still wearing the scullery rags she'd been scrubbing floors in when the guards dragged her out. Her crime? Sitting on a throne that wasn't meant for her. Her punishment? Death, obviously. What she didn't know until 5 minutes ago when the throne's ancient magic burned through her veins like liquid fire, was that the seat had already decided. And thrones don't make mistakes. If you want to see how an invisible girl destroys an empire built on blood and birthright, stay until the end. Drop a like, comment what city you're watching from, and let's begin. 3 days earlier, Kael had been nothing. Less than nothing, if you ask the people who mattered. She'd been scrubbing the floors of the grand hall since before dawn, her knees raw against the cold stone, her fingers cracked and bleeding from the harsh lye soap. Around her, the fortress of Blackstone Keep buzzed with preparation. Servants ran through corridors carrying platters of food, bolts of expensive fabric, wine barrels stamped with seals from territories Kael would never see. The High Council was gathering, all 7 territorial alphas converging on Duskfall Ridge for the first time in a decade. Someone important had died. Someone even more important would be chosen to replace them. Kael didn't care about the politics. Politics were for people who had names that mattered, bloodlines that stretched back generations, warriors who'd earned their place through conquest or coin. She had none of those things. She was an orphan who'd been found half dead in a snowdrift 17 years ago, raised by the keep's head cook out of something that might have been pity or might have just been a need for extra hands in the kitchen. "Move faster, girl," Overseer Marin's voice cut through the hall like a whip crack. "The delegates arrive at midday, and this floor still looks like a pig wallow." Kael didn't look up. Looking up invited conversation, and conversation with Marin always ended with bruises. She kept her head down, scrubbing harder at a stain that had probably been there since before she was born. "I said faster." A boot connected with Kael's ribs, not hard enough to break anything, but enough to send her sprawling across the wet stone. Her bucket tipped, dirty water spreading across the section she'd just finished. Kael bit down on the inside of her cheek, tasting blood. She didn't cry out. Crying out was permission to hit harder. Clumsy waste of space. Marin stepped over her like she was part of the floor. "Clean that up, and if the delegates see one speck of dirt when they arrive, I'll have you scrubbing the latrines for a month." The overseer's footsteps echoed away down the corridor. Kael stayed where she was for a moment, her cheek pressed against the cold stone, her ribs screaming. Around her, other servants pretended not to notice. They had their own work, their own survival to worry about. In Duskfall Ridge, you learned early. Everyone was on their own. She pushed herself up slowly, retrieved the bucket, and started over. By the time the sun reached its peak, the grand hall gleamed. Kael's hands were shaking from exhaustion, her back a solid knot of pain, but the floor was perfect. Not that anyone would notice. Perfection was expected from servants. It was only imperfection that got attention. "All servants to the kitchens," Marin barked from the doorway. "The delegates are entering the courtyard. No one shows their face in the main halls until summoned. Move." Kael moved. The kitchens were chaos. Head cook Marta, the woman who'd saved Kael from freezing to death all those years ago, stood at the center of it all like a general commanding troops. She was a mountain of a woman, broad-shouldered and heavy-handed, with gray hair pulled back in a severe knot, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile sometime around the fall of the old regime. "Kael, where in the frozen hells have you been? Scrubbing the Don't care. Take these platters to the staging area, and for the love of—" Marta grabbed Kael's chin, tilting her face toward the light. "You look like death. Wash your face. If any of the delegates see you looking like that, they'll think we're serving them food prepared by corpses." "Yes, Marta." Kael splashed water from the washing basin across her face, scrubbing away the grime as best she could. Her reflection in the copper-backed pan showed a girl who did, in fact, look half dead. Dark hollows under darker eyes, skin pale from too many hours indoors, brown hair that hung limp and dull around a face too thin to be pretty and too unremarkable to be noticed. Perfect. She loaded her arms with serving platters and made her way toward the staging area just off the grand hall. Through the partially open door, she could hear them arriving. Alpha Thorn of the Northern Reach, the herald's voice boomed through the hall. Kael peeked through the gap in the door. Thorn was exactly what you'd expect from the north, massive, bearded, wearing furs that probably came from animals he'd killed with his bare hands. His warriors flanked him, each one looking like they could snap Kael in half without breaking stride. Alpha Vex of the Eastern Wastes. Vex was smaller but somehow more terrifying, lean and sharp-featured with eyes that moved constantly, cataloging threats. Her people wore light armor designed for speed, and every one of them carried multiple weapons. Alpha Marok of the Shadowpine territory. Alpha Castellan of the Merchant Roads. Alpha Drake of the Ironwood domain. Kael's breath caught. Ronan Drake. Everyone knew that name. He was younger than the other alphas, barely 30, but he'd claimed his territory through a combination of strategic brilliance and absolutely ruthless efficiency. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if it didn't look like it was carved from granite. His people didn't just respect him, they feared him. And he was walking directly toward the staging area. Kael ducked back, heart hammering. Servants weren't supposed to look at alphas. Direct eye contact could be interpreted as challenge, and challenging an alpha was a good way to end up dead. The boy's territory is barely a territory, someone was saying, Alpha Thorn from the sound of it. Ironwood is more forest than people. What makes him think he has a voice here? Ironwood controls the only viable trade route to the western ports. That was Drake, his voice calm and cold. Which means I control whether your furs reach the markets that will pay for them. I'd say that gives me a voice. Silence. Then Thorn laughed, a booming sound that held no humor. Careful, boy. Threats are easy to make, harder to back up. I don't make threats, Alpha Thorn. I make observations. Whether you choose to hear them as threats says more about your position than mine. Kael heard footsteps moving away, then Castellan's smooth voice. Gentlemen, we're here to choose a supreme, not start a war. Save the posturing for after we've made our selection. The supreme. That's what this was about. The ruler of all 7 territories, the one voice that could unite or divide the entire ridge. The position had been empty since the last supreme died without a clear successor 6 months ago. In that time, the territories had started to fracture, old grudges surfacing, border disputes turning bloody. The throne will choose, said another voice, older and reed-thin, Elder Voss, the council's record keeper. As it always has, bloodline, strength, wisdom, the seat knows what the ridge needs. Superstitious nonsense, Vex muttered. It's a chair, an old one granted, but still just a chair. Then you won't mind sitting in it, Voss replied. Shall we begin? Kael realized she was supposed to be moving. She hefted her platters and slipped through the servants' entrance into the grand hall proper, keeping her eyes down, her movements small and quiet. The throne sat at the far end of the hall on a raised dais. It was made of black stone veined with something that might have been silver, or might have been something older, something that didn't have a name anymore. Kael had cleaned around it 100 times and never really looked at it. It was just furniture, another thing to dust. But now with all 7 alphas gathered, with warriors lining the walls and council members taking their seats, the throne looked different, bigger, more aware. Kael shook off the thought. Exhaustion was making her fanciful. She set down her platters on the serving tables and turned to leave. The trial will proceed in order of territorial seniority, Elder Voss was saying. Alpha Thorn, as eldest, you will sit first. Thorn approached the throne like he was approaching an enemy. His hand went to the axe at his belt. An unconscious gesture, Kael thought, but several of the other alphas tensed anyway. He sat. Nothing happened. The hall held its breath. Kael found herself holding hers too, though she couldn't have said why. Thorn stood. Well, is there supposed to be lightning? A voice from the heavens? The throne accepts or rejects, Voss said quietly. If it accepts, you'll know. And if it rejects, you'll know that too. One by one, they sat. Vex moved like a cat, every muscle coiled and ready. Marok looked bored. Castellan sat with the careful precision of someone who treated everything like a negotiation. None of them were chosen. The atmosphere in this hall shifted from anticipation to frustration to barely concealed anger. This is a waste of time, Vex said. The seat's magic is dead. We should choose by vote. The law is clear, Voss replied. The throne chooses. If none of you are accepted, then what? Thorn's voice was dangerous. We wait another 6 months, another year, while the territories tear themselves apart. Perhaps the throne is waiting for someone who isn't here, Castellan suggested. A hidden heir? There are no hidden heirs, Marek cut in. We've searched. Every bloodline has been traced back 3 generations. If there was a legitimate successor, we would have found them. Kael was backing toward the servants' entrance when Elder Voss spoke again. Then we adjourn until morning. The council will convene at dawn to discuss. No! Every head turned toward Ronan Drake. He hadn't moved from his position near the windows, hadn't shown any particular interest in the proceedings until now. Alpha Drake? I haven't sat yet. Voss blinked. The order is by seniority, and you are the youngest alpha by... I'm still an alpha. I have the right to try. Kael could see the calculation happening on the other alphas' faces. Letting Drake try meant admitting he had equal standing, but refusing him meant open conflict, and nobody wanted that. Not yet. Very well, Voss said finally. Alpha Drake, approach the throne. Drake crossed the hall with the kind of casual confidence that made people move out of his way without him having to ask. He stopped in front of the throne, studying it like it was a puzzle to solve rather than a seat to claim. Then he sat. For a moment, nothing. Kael was already turning away, already thinking about the hour of sleep she might get before the evening meal needed to be prepared. Then the throne screamed. Not a sound, worse than a sound. Kael felt it in her bones, a vibration that made her teeth ache and her vision blur. The air in the hall turned electric, raising the hair on her arms. Drake was on his feet in an instant, hand on his sword, but he wasn't thrown back. The throne wasn't rejecting him. It was waiting. What's happening? Castellan demanded. Voss was staring at the throne, his face pale. I don't know. This has never, in all the records I've never read of... The throne pulsed again, stronger this time. Several of the warriors stumbled. One of Vex's people went to their knees, and Kael, standing frozen by the servant's entrance, felt something pull at her. Not physically, deeper than that, like a hand reaching into her chest and tugging on something she didn't know she had. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Instead, she took a step forward. Then another. Everyone out, Voss was saying. Clear the hall. We need to... Kael was walking now, her feet moving without her permission, carrying her down the center aisle toward the throne. Servants didn't walk in the center aisle. Servants kept to the walls, kept to the shadows, kept invisible. But she couldn't stop. Who the hell is that? Thorn's voice, sharp with confusion. A servant, someone else said. Someone grab her before... Hands reached for her. Kael dodged without thinking, her body moving with an agility she didn't know she possessed. The throne was pulling harder now, a current she couldn't fight even if she wanted to. Which she didn't. That was the strange part. She should be terrified. She should be fighting to escape. Instead, she felt like she was finally going in the right direction. Stop her! Marin's shriek cut through the confusion. She's just a... Guards! Kael reached the dais, stepped up. Every eye in the hall was on her alphas, warriors, council members, servants peeking through doorways. She'd spent her entire life being invisible. Not anymore. Ronan Drake stood 3 feet away, his expression unreadable. He didn't try to stop her, didn't move at all, just watched with those cold, calculating eyes as Kael approached the throne. She should say something, apologize, explain. But there were no words for what was happening, no explanation that would make sense. So she sat. The throne erupted. Light, silver-white and ancient, exploded outward from the seat, filling the hall, blinding everyone. Kael felt power pour into her, through her, power that had been sleeping for longer than she'd been alive, power that recognized something in her that she didn't recognize in herself. The throne didn't just accept her, it claimed her. When the light faded, Kael was still sitting, her hands gripping the armrests, her whole body shaking. The throne had gone quiet, but she could feel it now. a presence in the back of her mind, ancient and patient and absolutely certain. The hall was silent. Then someone laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "You have got to be joking," Vex said. "The throne chose a servant? Impossible," Thorn growled. "This is some kind of trick. She tampered with it. She's an orphan." Marin's voice was shrill with panic. "No bloodline, no family. We don't even know where she came from. This is a mistake." "The throne doesn't make mistakes," Elder Voss said quietly. His face was ashen, but his voice held a strange note of wonder. "In 800 years of recorded history, the throne has never made a mistake." "Then the throne is broken." Marok slammed his fist on the table. "I will not bow to some kitchen rat who probably can't even read." Kael's legs were shaking. She tried to stand and couldn't. The throne's power was still coursing through her. Too much, too fast. Her body wasn't built for this. A hand appeared in front of her face. She looked up. Ronan Drake was offering his hand. "Can you stand?" His voice was low, meant only for her. Kael stared at him, at his hand, at the face that showed nothing, no anger, no disgust, just cool assessment. Yes." She took his hand. His grip was firm, steady, and he pulled her to her feet with easy strength. For a moment they stood there, her hand still in his, and she saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not kindness. Drake didn't deal in kindness. Interest. He released her hand and stepped back, addressing the hall. "The throne has chosen. The law is clear." "The law," Castellan said carefully, "assumes the throne will choose someone qualified, someone trained, someone with at least basic—" "The law," Drake cut in, "makes no such assumptions. The throne chooses. That is the beginning and end of the law." "You can't be serious." Vex was staring at him. "You're actually going to defend this?" "I'm not defending anything. I'm observing the law. If you want to change it, call for a vote. Until then, the throne has chosen, and we are bound by that choice." Kael's head was spinning. Why was he helping her? What did he gain from this? "A vote, then," Thorn said immediately. "All in favor of declaring this trial invalid and choosing by council vote instead." "Against the law," Voss said, but his voice wavered. "The law serves the Ridge," Thorn shot back. "And the Ridge cannot be served by this child who doesn't even have a family name." "Varen!" Everyone turned. Marta stood in the servants' entrance, her broad face set in hard lines. "Her name is Kael Varen. I gave it to her when I took her in. It's as legitimate as anyone's name here." "You're a cook," Marek said dismissively. "And you're a bully who won his territory by murdering his predecessor," Marta replied evenly. "We all have our roles." The hall erupted, voices shouting over voices, accusations flying, warriors reaching for weapons. In the center of it all, Kael stood perfectly still, her mind blank with shock. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. "Enough!" Elder Voss's voice cracked like thunder. The old man rarely shouted, and the shock of it cut through the chaos. "The choice is made," he said into the silence. "The throne has chosen Kael Varen. By law, by tradition, by the authority vested in this council, she is recognized as the supreme elect. For now," Thorn added darkly. "For now," Voss agreed. "The law also requires a trial period. 3 months. In that time, the elect must prove themselves worthy of the position through trials of strength, wisdom, and leadership. At the end of 3 months, the council votes. If the majority finds her worthy, she becomes supreme. If not, she dies," Vex finished. "That's the law, isn't it? A failed elect cannot be allowed to live. Too dangerous." Kael's legs gave out. She sat back down on the throne hard, her breath coming in short gasps. 3 months to prove herself. 3 months to do the impossible, or die trying. "The trials will begin tomorrow at dawn," Voss said. "Kael Varen, you will be confined to quarters until then, under guard, for your protection." "House arrest," Drake murmured. "How protective. Do you object, Alpha Drake?" "Would it matter if I did?" Voss didn't answer. Guards were already moving forward, surrounding Kael. She rose on shaking legs, let them lead her toward the door. As she passed Marin, the overseer spat at her feet. Should have left you in the snow. As she passed Marta, the cook pressed something into her hand, a small cloth bundle. Bread and cheese. They won't feed you tonight. They want you weak. As she passed Ronan Drake, he said nothing, but his eyes followed her all the way out of the hall. The room they locked her in was better than anywhere she'd ever slept. A real bed, a window that looked out over the courtyard, even a wash basin with clean water. A gilded cage. Kael sat on the edge of the bed and unwrapped Marta's bundle. Bread, cheese, and a small piece of paper with 3 words written in the cook's careful hand. Don't trust anyone. Kael ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Through the window, she could see the sun setting over Duskfall Ridge, the harsh, beautiful frontier territory that had never wanted her and now owned her completely. She was 17 years old. She had no training, no allies, no idea what she was doing, and in 3 months, if she failed to prove the impossible, they would kill her. Kael lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The throne's power still hummed in her bones, alien and vast and terrifying. She had no idea what it wanted from her, but she was starting to suspect it wasn't going to ask permission. They came for her before dawn. Kael hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the throne's power moving through her veins like something alive, restless and hungry. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache, her muscles trembling with exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical labor and everything to do with containing something she didn't understand. The door opened without warning. No knock, no announcement. 2 guards in council livery stepped inside, their faces blank. Get up, the first trial begins in 1 hour. Kael was already dressed. She'd never taken off the servant's clothes from yesterday. She stood, her legs unsteady, and followed them out into the corridor. Blackstone Keep looked different in the pre-dawn darkness, colder. The torches cast shadows that seemed to move on their own, and Kael's footsteps echoed too loudly on the stone floor. They passed other servants, early risers preparing for the day's work, and every single one of them looked away. Some crossed to the other side of the corridor. One girl Kael had shared a sleeping pallet with for 3 years actually pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide with something that looked like terror. Kael was contaminated now, touched by power she wasn't supposed to have. Even the lowest servants knew better than to associate with her. The guards led her down, into parts of the keep she'd never seen. The air grew colder, damper. The walls changed from worked stone to rough rock, and Kael realized they were going underground. They stopped at a heavy iron door. One guard knocked twice. Enter. Inside was a chamber that might have been a meeting room once, but now looked more like a war council. Maps covered every surface, territory boundaries marked in different colors. Weapons hung on the walls, not decorative pieces, but working steel that had seen use. And in the center of it all stood the 7 alphas, plus Elder Voss and a handful of council members Kael didn't recognize. All eyes turned to her as she entered. The elect, Voss said, and Kael couldn't tell if there was mockery in his tone or just exhaustion. Please sit. There was one chair, right in the center of the room, surrounded on all sides. Kael sat, feeling the weight of their stares like physical pressure. Let's not waste time with pleasantries, Thorne said. He leaned against the map table, arms crossed, looking at Kael like she was a stain on his boot. You sat on the throne. It didn't kill you. That's the beginning and end of your qualifications. Now comes the part where you prove you're not going to get us all slaughtered. The trials are simple in concept, Voss cut in, shooting Thorne a warning look. 3 tests over 3 months, strength, wisdom, leadership. Pass all 3, and the council votes on your confirmation. Fail even one, she dies, Vex finished. She was studying Kael with the focused intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Quick death, if she's lucky. The law is specific about failed elects. They're too dangerous to leave alive. Kael's mouth was dry. What's the first trial? Strength, Marok said. He smiled, showing too many teeth. Physical combat. You versus a champion from each territory. 7 fights. You need to win 4 to pass. The room tilted. Kael gripped the arms of the chair to keep from falling. I'm not a fighter. I don't know how to... Should have thought of that before you sat on the throne, Thorne said. I didn't choose to sit on the throne. It pulled me. Kael cut herself off. They didn't care. Of course they didn't care. The trial begins at noon, Voss said quietly. You have 6 hours. I suggest you use them wisely. 6 hours to learn to fight? Kael's voice cracked. That's impossible. Yes, Castellan agreed. He'd been silent until now, watching her with those calculating merchant's eyes. It is, which is rather the point, I think. Kael looked around the room, searching for what? An ally? Someone who might help her? Every face was either hostile or carefully neutral, except one. Ronan Drake stood in the corner, half-shadowed, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, didn't offer encouragement, just looked at her like she was a problem to solve. Meeting adjourned, Voss said. Kael Varen, you'll be escorted to the preparation chambers. The arena will open to spectators at mid-morning. I suggest you be ready. The guards moved to take her arms, but Kael stood on her own. Her legs shook, but they held. She'd made it 3 steps toward the door when Drake spoke. I'll train her. Everyone stopped. What? Thorne's voice was dangerous. 6 hours isn't enough to make her a fighter, Drake said calmly, but it's enough to teach her how not to die quickly. Unless the council would prefer she collapse in the first match, that would make for poor entertainment. Why do you care? Bex asked. I don't. But the throne chose her, which means there's something we're not seeing. I prefer to understand what before we kill her. No. Thorne pushed off from the table. Absolutely not. You help her, you're declaring an alliance. That gives her legitimacy she hasn't earned. I'm offering combat instruction to someone who's about to be thrown into an arena, Drake replied. If that's enough to legitimize her, then perhaps the real problem is your champions aren't as formidable as you think. Thorne's hand went to his axe. Several warriors around the room tensed. Enough, Voss said sharply. Alpha Drake, the council appreciates your concern, but formal instruction would indeed be inappropriate. However, he paused, choosing his words carefully. If the elect were to find herself in the training yards during her preparation time, and if someone else happened to be training there as well, the council could hardly prevent such a coincidence. It was the thinnest pretense Kael had ever heard, but Thorne's hand dropped from his axe, and the tension in the room eased slightly. Drake nodded once. Understood. Then we're done here, Marok said. I need to go tell my champion to take his time. Make it entertaining. He grinned at Kael. Nothing personal, girl. Just business. They filed out, leaving Kael with the guards and a creeping sense of unreality. This couldn't be happening. Yesterday, she'd been scrubbing floors. Today, she was preparing to fight trained warriors in an arena. The guards led her up and out, through corridors that grew lighter as they climbed. They emerged into the training yards just as the sun broke over the eastern wall. The yards were empty except for practice dummies, weapon racks, and one man standing in the center of the sparring ring. Ronan Drake had changed into training leathers. He was going through forms with a practice sword, movements fluid and economical. He didn't look up as Kael approached, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. The guards left her at the ring's edge and withdrew to the wall. Kael stood there, uncertain. Was she supposed to speak first? Wait for him to notice her? You're staring, Drake said without breaking his form. If you have time to stare, you have time to learn. Pick up a sword. Kael moved to the weapon rack. The practice swords were wooden but heavy, balanced for real weight. She chose the smallest one and immediately regretted it. The thing felt like lifting an iron bar. Not that one. Drake finally stopped, turning to face her. That's a child's training sword. You're small, but you're not that small. Try the one to the left. The next sword was longer, heavier. Kael could barely keep the tip off the ground. Drake watched her struggle for a moment, then sighed. Put it down. How much do you weigh? I don't know. Maybe, you're what, 90 pounds soaking wet? No muscle mass to speak of. Grip the sword again. She did. He stepped forward, and before Kael could react, he'd grabbed her wrist and was examining her hands like she was livestock at market. Calluses from scrubbing, not from weapons work. Flexibility in the fingers, but no strength in the grip. He released her wrist and stepped back. You can't win with strength. You probably can't win with skill. 6 hours isn't enough. So you're going to have to win with their arrogance. I don't understand. They're going to expect you to fight like them. Stand your ground, trade blows, rely on strength and training. Drake moved to the weapon rack and selected a short blade, barely longer than a large knife. You're not going to do any of that. You're going to move, dodge, frustrate, and survive. If you're lucky, they'll make a mistake out of irritation. If you're very lucky, you can capitalize on it. That's your strategy? Hope they make a mistake? You have a better one? Kael didn't. Stance, Drake said. Show me how you'd stand if someone came at you. Kael did her best impression of the guard she'd seen training, feet planted, weapon raised. Drake shook his head. Wrong. You're trying to be a tree. Trees get cut down. Be water instead. That doesn't mean anything. Feet closer together. Weight on the balls of your feet, not your heels. Knees slightly bent. Good. Now when I move... He lunged forward, and Kael stumbled backward, nearly falling. You move faster. Again. Oh, they drilled for an hour. Then another. Drake didn't teach her how to fight. He taught her how to run away efficiently, how to read an opponent's weight shift before they struck, how to make herself a smaller target, how to use panic as fuel instead of paralysis. You're going to be terrified out there, he said, circling her while she tried to track his movement. That's good. Fear makes you fast. But you need to control where that speed goes, not backward. They'll corner you, not sideways randomly. They'll predict it. You move with purpose. Make them think you have a plan, even when you don't. Kael's lungs were burning, her arms shaking. Why are you helping me? I told you, the throne chose you for a reason. That's not an answer. Drake stopped circling. For the first time since they'd started, he looked at her directly, and Kael saw something calculating behind those cold eyes. The ridge is breaking, he said quietly. The territories are fracturing. Without a supreme, we'll be at each other's throats within a year. Civil war, thousands dead, everything our ancestors built, gone. He paused. I don't care about you, Kael Varen, but I care about preventing that war. If you're the throne's choice, then maybe, just maybe, you're the key to holding this place together. And if I'm not, then you die, and we're back where we started. He picked up his practice sword again. Now stop talking and move. You've got 4 hours left and we haven't even covered how to fall without breaking your neck. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Kael could barely stand. Every muscle screamed. Her hands were blistered despite the practice sword's wrapped grip. She'd thrown up twice in the bushes at the yard's edge, and Drake had simply waited while she wiped her mouth and returned to the ring. That's enough, he said finally. Any more, and you'll be too exhausted to fight. Kael collapsed onto the ground, chest heaving. I'm already too exhausted to fight. Then you'll have to fight anyway. Drake offered his hand. The second time he'd done that, Kael noted distantly. She took it, let him pull her up. Listen, he said, and his voice had lost some of its hard edge. Out there, in the arena, they're going to try to break you fast. Make an example. The first fight will be brutal. Survive it. Even if you lose, survive. Show them you can take punishment and keep standing. That's worth more than winning. Easy for you to say. I've been in arenas. I know what I'm talking about. He released her hand. And Kael, don't try to be someone you're not. You're not a warrior. You're a survivor. That's what the throne saw in you, so survive. The guards appeared at the yard's entrance. It's time. The walk to the arena felt like a walk to an execution. Maybe it was. The corridor leading to the fighter's entrance was narrow and dark, and Kael could hear the crowd above. Hundreds of voices, maybe thousands, all come to watch the servant girl die. They'd given her light armor, boiled leather that barely fit, too big in the shoulders and too tight around the ribs. A real sword now, not practice wood, and the weight of it made her arms ache. Kael Varen, a functionary with the scroll, looked her up and down, his expression suggesting he'd seen more impressive specimens in the livestock pens. You'll enter when your name is called. The rules are simple. Yield, die, or win. Killing blows are permitted but not required. Medical support will be available between fights. Any questions? About 1,000. Kael shook her head. Good luck, the functionary said, and it sounded like he was wishing luck to a condemned prisoner. The roar of the crowd intensified. Through the gate, Kael could see the arena floor, sand and packed dirt, stained dark in patches she tried not to think about. The stands rose on all sides, packed with spectators. Nobles in the good seats, commoners in the cheap ones, but all of them here for the same thing. Blood. "Citizens of Duskfall Ridge!" The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Today we witness the first trial of the elect. Kael Varen, chosen by the throne, will face 7 champions, 1 from each territory. 4 victories secure her passage. Defeat means death." The crowd roared approval. "Our first champion, from the Northern Reach, undefeated in 23 arena matches, Kael the Breaker." The opposite gate opened. What emerged barely looked human, 7 feet of muscle and scar tissue, carrying an axe that Kael couldn't have lifted with both hands. Kael the Breaker grinned at the crowd, showing gaps where teeth used to be, and the noise became deafening. And her opponent, the servant who dared sit on the throne, Kael Varen. The gate in front of Kael opened. She didn't move. Couldn't move. Her legs had turned to water. "Move!" The guard behind her shoved her forward, and Kael stumbled out into the arena. The sunlight was blinding after the dim corridor. The crowd's noise hit her like a physical wall. Kael took 3 steps onto the sand and stopped, her sword hanging limp in her hand, staring across the arena at the thing called Kael. He was already moving toward her, taking his time, letting the crowd's energy build. 50 feet away. 40. 30. "Fight," Kael whispered to herself. "Move. Do something." 20 feet, Kael raised his axe and the crowd rose with it, screaming. 10 feet. Something inside Kael snapped, not broke, but snapped into place. The throne's power, dormant since yesterday, suddenly flared hot in her chest. Not enough to be useful, not enough to matter, just enough to remind her that she was still alive, and the living could move. Kael swung. Kael dove right, rolling badly, losing her sword, scrambling in the sand. The axe blade passed through the space where her head had been, with a whistle of displaced air. The crowd's tone changed, some cheers, some boos. They wanted blood, not dodging. "Stand still, rat!" Kane's voice was thick, each word an effort. He turned, surprisingly fast for his size, and swung again. Kael was already moving, not away, but in, closer than his axe's effective range. Drake's words echoed, "Make them expect you to run. Then don't." She was inside Kane's guard for half a second before his free hand caught her across the face. Kael saw stars, tasted blood, hit the sand hard. The world spun. A shadow fell across her, Kael raising the axe overhead, both hands, killing blow. Kael kicked sand up into his face. It was a child's trick. A dirty, desperate, pathetic trick. It worked. Kael roared, stumbling back, pawing at his eyes. Kael scrambled for her sword, grabbed it, and did the only thing she could think of. She ran. Not away. Around, circling, keeping moving, while Kael blinked and cursed and the crowd's boos grew louder. "Coward!" someone screamed from the stands. "Fight him!" But Kael didn't fight. She ran and dodged and waited. Kael charged like a bull, and she sidestepped. He swung wide, and she ducked under. Minutes passed. Then more. The crowd's bloodlust was turning to frustration, and Kael was getting tired. Kael could see it. The way his breathing had gone ragged, the way his swings were getting slower, wilder. The axe was heavy, and he'd been wasting energy trying to end this fast. "Survive," Drake had said. "Make them make mistakes." Kael charged again, roaring. Kael waited until the last possible second, then dropped flat to the sand. The axe whistled over her back. Kael's momentum carried him forward. He tried to stop, couldn't, stumbled. Kael drove her sword into the back of his knee. Not deep, she didn't have the strength for deep. But enough. Kael went down with a scream, the axe falling from his hands. Kael scrambled on top of him, getting her sword up to his throat with shaking hands, pressing the edge against his skin. The arena went silent. Kael stared up at her, eyes wide with shock and pain, and something that might have been respect. "Do it!" he gasped. "Finish it!" Kael's hands trembled. She could feel his pulse against her blade. One push, that's all it would take. "Yield," she said instead. "What?" "Yield or die. Choose." Kael stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed, a pained, gasping sound. "I yield. Throne damn me. I yield." Kael released him, staggering back. The crowd's roar returned, mixed now, some cheering, some screaming their disapproval. "Victory!" the announcer's voice boomed. "Kael Varin claims the first match!" Kael barely made it off the sand before her legs gave out. Hands caught her, attendants pulling her through the gate, sitting her down on a bench. Someone pressed water to her lips. Someone else was examining the cut on her face where Cain had hit her. 5 minutes until the next match, one of them said. Kael's head snapped up. 5 minutes? I need... Rules are rules. 5 minutes between matches. Can you stand? Barely. Kael stood, swaying. The next champion is from the Eastern Wastes, the attendant continued, wrapping a bandage around Kael's hand where blisters had split. Fights with twin blades. Fast. You won't be able to tire this one out. Next match, the announcer called. From the Eastern Wastes, Mira Swiftblade. The gate opened again. Kael walked out into the arena on legs that felt like borrowed things, gripping her sword in hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Across from her stood a woman who looked like she was made of knives and bad intentions. Twin short swords, light armor, and eyes that promised a much faster death than Cain had offered. The crowd was louder now. They'd seen blood. They wanted more. Mira smiled, crossed her blades, and attacked. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a lesson in why amateurs died quickly. Mira moved like water, like wind, like nothing Kael could track. The twin blades came from angles that shouldn't exist. Kael backpedaled, blocked desperately, and felt steel bite into her shoulder, her arm, her side. Shallow cuts, testing, measuring. You got lucky with Cain, Mira said, almost conversational, as she drove Kael backward. He's strong but stupid. I'm neither. Kael tried Drake's tactics, tried to dodge, to move unpredictably. But Mira read her like a book, cutting off escape routes before Kael even saw them. A blade caught Kael's sword hand. Her weapon spun away into the sand. Mira's boot connected with Kael's chest, and she went down hard, wind driven from her lungs. Yield, Mira said, blades at Kael's throat. I'll make it quick. Kael couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The throne's power flared again in her chest, hot and angry, but still not enough, not nearly enough. I said yield. Kael grabbed a handful of sand and threw it up into Mira's face. The same trick, because it was the only trick she had. Mira dodged, laughing. Seriously? You already used that, did you think? Kael's other hand came up with a rock she'd grabbed while on her back, and she swung it as hard as she could into Mira's knee. The satisfying crunch of impact. Mira's laugh cut off with a gasp. Not enough to drop her, but enough to make her stumble. Kael rolled, grabbed her sword, came up swinging wild and desperate. Mira blocked easily, even on one good leg, but the smile was gone now, replaced with cold focus. Cute, she said, but not enough. She was right. Kael knew it, felt it in every screaming muscle, every labored breath. This wasn't like fighting Cain. Mira wasn't going to tire, wasn't going to make stupid mistakes. The blades came in again, a whirlwind of steel, and Kael did the only thing she could. She stopped fighting and started surviving. No thought of winning, no strategy beyond the next second. Just move, block, dodge, stay alive. Seconds became minutes. Blood ran down Kael's arm from a dozen cuts. Her vision was starting to blur. The crowd was chanting something, but she couldn't hear the words over the roar of blood in her ears. Mira's blade sliced across Kael's ribs. Not deep, but enough. Kael gasped, stumbled. Should have yielded, Mira said, moving in for the kill. The throne's power exploded, not gradually, not building up, just there, suddenly, flooding through Kael like lightning through water. Her vision went white. Her sword arm moved on its own, faster than thought, blocking a strike she hadn't seen coming. Mira's eyes went wide. The power left as quickly as it came, leaving Kael gasping. But in that half second of shocked hesitation, she did something stupid. She attacked. No skill, no technique, just desperate forward momentum, sword swinging. Mira blocked, but she was off balance, favoring her injured knee, and Kael pressed the advantage she didn't really have. Their blades locked. Kael was weaker, but she had momentum and gravity on her side. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and steel. When the dust cleared, Kael was on top, her sword pressed against Mira's throat for the second time in an hour. Yield, she gasped out. Mira stared up at her.
How did you... What was that? Yield or die? A long pause. Then Mira laughed, the sound sharp and genuine. You're going to be interesting. Fine. I yield. The crowd erupted, half in approval, half in outrage. Kael didn't care. She rolled off Mira and lay on her back in the sand, staring up at the sky, wondering if she was dying. 2 victories, the announcer sounded almost surprised. 5 matches remain. Kael closed her eyes. She couldn't do this 5 more times. Her body was already breaking down. The throne's power came and went as it pleased. She couldn't control it, couldn't count on it. 4 more fights, she needed 4 total victories, 2 down, 2 to go. Unless the next champion killed her, which seemed increasingly likely. The attendants pulled her up again, dragged her to the bench. More water. Bandages. Someone stitching the worst of the cuts without bothering with anything to numb the pain. Can you continue? The functionary asked. Kael wanted to say no, wanted to yield, to let this nightmare end. But if she yielded, she died. That was the law. Yes, she whispered. Then prepare yourself. The next match begins in 3 minutes. Through the gate, Kael could see the crowd. Thousands of faces, all watching her. In the noble section, she spotted the alphas. Thorn looked disgusted. Vex was leaning forward, interested. Castellan was taking notes. And Ronan Drakey sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable, watching her like she was the most fascinating problem he'd ever seen. Kael stood, her legs held. Barely. The gate opened. She walked back into the arena, into the sun and sand and blood, into the impossible task of surviving. The crowd's roar washed over her like a wave, and somewhere in the noble section she could have sworn she saw Drake nod. Once. Just once. It would have to be enough. The 3rd champion was a boy. That's what threw Kael. After Khan's brutal strength and Mira's lethal precision, she'd expected another monster. Instead, across the blood-stained sand stood someone who couldn't have been more than 15, skinny and pale, holding a staff that looked too big for his frame. From the Shadowpine territory, the announcer called, Fenris the Blessed! The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, others muttered disapproval. Kael caught fragments from the stands. Child soldier, Marok's cruelty. Shouldn't be allowed. Fenris didn't seem to hear any of it. His eyes were fixed on Kael, and they were wrong. Too bright, too focused. Like looking into a fire that burned with something other than heat. Begin. Fenris didn't move. Just stood there, staff planted in the sand, lips moving in words Kael couldn't hear. She should attack. Press the advantage while he was distracted. But something about those moving lips, those burning eyes, made her hesitate. The air pressure changed. Kael felt it in her teeth, in her bones. A building tension like the moment before lightning strikes. The throne's power stirred in response, agitated almost. Afraid? Stop whatever you're doing, Kael called out. I don't want to hurt you. Fenris smiled. It was the saddest thing Kael had ever seen. You can't, he said softly. I'm already gone. His eyes rolled back. The staff erupted with white fire. What happened next defied everything Kael thought she knew about fighting. Fenris moved, not like a trained warrior, but like a puppet on strings, his body contorting in ways that should have broken bones. The staff became a blur of burning wood and impossible angles. Kael barely got her sword up in time. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms, numbing her fingers. She stumbled back and Fenris was already there, staff sweeping low. Kael jumped, felt the displaced air beneath her feet. He's channeling, someone shouted from the stands. That's forbidden magic. The rules allow any combat method, another voice countered, unless the council objects. In the noble section, the alphas were on their feet. Merrick was laughing. Voss looked horrified. And Ronan Drake's face had gone carefully blank, the expression of someone working very hard not to react. The staff caught Kael across the shoulder, and she felt something crack. Not bone, but close. She rolled with the impact, came up gasping, and the throne's power surged again without her permission. This time it was different. This time it spoke. Not in words. In images, feelings, ancient memories that weren't hers flooding through her mind. A throne room that didn't exist anymore. A war that had burned the world. And power, so much power, being locked away because it was too dangerous to wield.
Stop him, the throne whispered. He's burning his own life. Kael's vision cleared. She looked at Fenris, really looked, and saw what she'd missed before. The boy was dying. Every second of that impossible speed, that unnatural strength, was consuming him from the inside out. His skin had gone translucent, blue veins showing through like a spider web. Blood leaked from his nose, his ears. Fenris, stop, Kael shouted. You're killing yourself. I know. His voice was faint, distant. The staff whirled faster. This is my purpose, my only purpose. To serve my alpha until there's nothing left. Rage flooded through Kael, not at Fenris, but at Marok, at a system that could look at a child and see only a weapon to be used up and discarded. The throne's power answered her rage. It didn't ask permission this time. It simply took over. Kael's sword moved on its own, blocking the staff with inhuman precision. Her body shifted into stances she'd never learned, muscle memory from someone who'd been dead for centuries flowing through her like water. She wasn't fighting anymore. The throne was fighting through her, and it was furious. The staff and sword met in a clash that sent sparks flying. Once, twice, 3 times, each impact harder than the last. Fenris's eyes cleared for just a moment. He looked at Kael, and she saw recognition there. Not of her, but of what was moving through her. The old power, he whispered. It chose truly. Then his legs gave out. Kael caught him before he hit the sand, her own strength returning as the throne's power receded. Fenris weighed almost nothing, his body bird fragile in her arms. I yield, he said, blood on his lips. Tell Marok, tell him I'm sorry I failed. You didn't fail, Kael said fiercely. You survived. That's not failure. Someone get a healer, she screamed at the functionaries. Now! They rushed forward, but slowly, reluctantly. In the noble section, Marok was already standing, already leaving. He didn't even glance back at the boy who'd nearly died for him. The healers took Fenris from Kael's arms, carrying him away on a stretcher. She watched them go, her hands shaking with something that wasn't exhaustion. Victory by yield, the announcer said, sounding uncertain. 3 matches won, 4 remaining. The crowd was quieter now. What they'd just witnessed wasn't entertainment. It was something uglier, and even the bloodthirsty ones seemed unsettled. Kael walked back through the gate on autopilot. The attendants tried to check her injuries, but she pushed them away. I need to see him. Fenris, is he? The healers will do what they can, one of them said. But that kind of magic, there's a price. He knew the price. He's 15 years old. He shouldn't have to pay any price. That's not how the Ridge works. You know that. Kael did know that. She'd lived it every day of her 17 years. But knowing and accepting were different things. 2 minutes until the next match, the functionary announced. Kael's head snapped up. 2 minutes? I need more time. Rules are clear. 5 minutes between normal matches. 2 minutes after a yield. The schedule must be maintained. The schedule, Kael repeated numbly. Right. Can't interrupt the entertainment. She stood, her body screaming protest. The throne's power had left her hollowed out, like something had burned through her from the inside. 3 fights down, 4 to go. And she could barely lift her sword. The next champion is from the Merchant Roads, the attendant said, wrapping fresh bandages around Kael's cracked ribs. Former pit fighter, bought his freedom and works for Castellan now. Name's Gregor. He fights smart and dirty. Great, Kael muttered. Next match, the announcer's voice boomed. From the Merchant Roads, Gregor the coin bought. The crowd cheered. Apparently they liked this one. Kael forced herself through the gate one more time. The sun had moved across the sky. How long had she been fighting? Hours? It felt like years. Gregor was waiting in the center of the arena. Middle-aged, scarred, with the calm confidence of someone who'd survived 100 fights and expected to survive 100 more. He carried a sword and a net, pit fighter weapons. Nothing personal, he said as Kael approached. Castellan's paying me well for this. I'll try to make it quick. Everyone keeps saying that, Kael replied. Nobody's managed it yet. Gregor smiled. I like you, kid. Shame about this. He attacked with the methodical efficiency of a professional. No wasted movement, no flash, just relentless pressure, using the net to limit Kael's mobility while the sword probed for openings. Kael lasted maybe 30 seconds before the net caught her ankle. She went down, rolled, slashed the rope, but Gregor was already there, sword point at her throat. "Yield," he said. "I wasn't joking about the quick part." Kael stared up at him, mind racing. The throne's power was exhausted. She was exhausted. She had nothing left, except words. "Castellan bought you," she said. "How much?" Gregor blinked. "What? How much is he paying you for this fight?" "That's none of your— 100 gold? 200? Kael pressed. "Because I'm worth more than that. The throne chose me. If I survive this, I become supreme. I could make you wealthy beyond anything Castellan's offering." Gregor's sword didn't move from her throat, but she saw calculation flicker in his eyes. "You won't survive. You've got 3 more fights after me." "Then you lose nothing by letting me win this one. But if I do survive, if I do become supreme, you'd have the gratitude of the most powerful person in the Ridge. Or I'd have Castellan's wrath for betraying him. Castellan respects profit above all else. He'd understand the calculation." Kael was making this up as she went, but the words felt right. "Let me win. I'll owe you a debt, and I pay my debts." Gregor studied her for a long moment. The crowd was getting restless, shouting for blood. "You're either very clever or very desperate," he said finally. "Can't I be both?" He laughed, a short, sharp sound, and stepped back, lowering his sword. "I yield." The arena exploded in confusion. Shouts of outrage, accusations of bribery, demands for explanations. In the noble section, Castellan was on his feet, his face carefully neutral, but Kael could see the merchant calculating, reassessing. She'd just turned a fight into a negotiation, in front of thousands of witnesses, and it had worked. "Victory by yield," the announcer called over the chaos. 4 matches won, 3 remaining. Kael barely made it off the sand. Her legs gave out the moment she was through the gate, and the attendants had to carry her to the bench. "That was either brilliant or suicidal," one of them muttered. "Probably both," Kael gasped. 4 victories. She'd done it. She'd passed the strength trial. Except— "There are still 3 matches," the functionary said, reading from his scroll. "The trial continues until all 7 champions have fought." Kael's stomach dropped. "But I only need 4 wins. I have 4 wins." "The rules state all matches must be completed. If you refuse to continue, it counts as forfeit. Forfeit means failure. Failure means death, I know." Kael wanted to scream, wanted to cry, wanted to lie down and never get up. Instead, she stood. Again. "Who's next?" "Alpha Vex's champion. Then Thorn's. Then Drake's." Drake's. Kael's eyes snapped to the noble section. Ronan Drake sat perfectly still, watching her, his expression unreadable. He'd helped her train, but he was still an alpha. Still part of the system that wanted her dead. Would he send a champion who would actually try to kill her? 1 minute, the announcer called. Kael picked up her sword. The blade felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The gate opened. Vex's champion was a woman who moved like smoke, all dark leather and throwing knives. She didn't bother with introductions. Just attacked, blades flying from every angle. Kael dodged, blocked, stumbled. A knife caught her in the shoulder. Another grazed her ribs. She was too slow, too tired, too broken. The throne's power stirred weakly, but there was nothing left to give. A blade was coming for her throat. Kael couldn't move fast enough to stop it. She closed her eyes. The impact never came. Kael opened her eyes to find the woman standing frozen, knife inches from Kael's neck, staring at something over Kael's shoulder. Kael turned. The throne was there. Not the physical throne that was still in the grand hall, but its presence, its power, manifesting in the arena like a pillar of silver light. The crowd went silent. "The elect has proven herself," a voice said. "Ancient, massive, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The trial is complete." The light faded. Vex's champion stepped back, lowering her weapons, her face pale. "I yield," she whispered. Kael stood in the center of the arena, swaying, not understanding what had just happened. In the stands, Elder Voss was on his feet, his face slack with shock. "The throne has intervened." In 800 years of recorded history, the throne has never intervened. What does that mean? Thorne demanded. It means... Voss looked at Kael, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she saw something other than doubt in his eyes. It means the throne has accepted her absolutely. The remaining matches are forfeit. The trial is over. The crowd erupted. Some in celebration, some in outrage, but the noise was overwhelming. Kael's legs finally gave out completely. She hit the sand hard and didn't get up. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was Ronan Drake standing at the arena's edge, staring at where the throne's light had been, his face showing the closest thing to fear she'd ever seen from him. Then nothing. She woke in darkness. Not the comfortable darkness of sleep, but the absolute blackness of deep underground. Her body was one massive bruise, every breath an exercise in pain management. You're awake. Kael's hand went to her side, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Easy. A flame sparked to life, revealing Ronan Drake sitting in a chair beside the narrow cot she was lying on. You've been unconscious for 6 hours. The healers say you'll live, but you need rest. Where am I? My quarters. Safest place I could think of while the council debates what to do with you. Kael blinked. Your quarters. Why would you... Because half the council wants you dead, and the other half wants to use you, and I'm still trying to figure out which category I fall into. Drake stood, moving to a table where a pitcher of water sat. He poured a cup and brought it to her. Drink. You lost a lot of blood. Kael took the cup with shaking hands. The water was cool, clean, and she drained it in seconds. The throne intervened, she said. What does that mean? It means you've become very dangerous, or very valuable. Possibly both. Drake refilled her cup. The throne hasn't manifested outside its chamber in living memory. Some of the older records mention it happening during the Sundering War, but those accounts are fragmentary at best. I didn't ask it to do that. I didn't ask for any of this. I know. Drake sat back down, studying her with those calculating eyes. That's what makes you interesting. You're not trying to seize power. You're just trying not to die. But the throne chose you anyway, and now it's defending that choice. The council won't accept this. You heard Thorne. They'll find another way to kill me. Probably, which is why we need to talk about what happens next. What do you mean? Drake leaned forward, his voice dropping. The second trial is wisdom. It's scheduled for 1 month from now. They'll give you impossible problems to solve, situations designed to expose you as unfit to lead. And unlike the arena, the throne can't intervene. It only manifests in response to direct physical threat. So I'm dead anyway, just slower. Not necessarily. Drake pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I have a proposal. An alliance. Kael stared at the paper. Why would you ally with me? Because you did something in that arena I've never seen anyone do. You turned a fight into a negotiation. You saw Gregor not as an enemy to defeat, but as a person with interests that could align with yours. That's wisdom, Kael. Real wisdom. The kind that builds empires instead of just conquering them. Or it was desperation. Desperation and wisdom aren't mutually exclusive. Drake unfolded the paper. I'm offering you access to my territory's resources. Books, advisors, training in leadership and governance. In exchange, if you survive, if you become supreme, Ironwood gets favorable trade agreements and a seat at your right hand in the new order. Kael looked at the contract, then at Drake. What's the real reason? This isn't about trade agreements. For the first time, Drake's mask slipped. Just for a moment, but it was enough to see the desperation underneath. I told you before. The ridge is breaking. My territory is small, isolated. When the Civil War comes, and it will come if we don't get a supreme, Ironwood will be crushed between the larger territories. I need a supreme who will prevent that war. And against all logic, I think you might be that person. I'm a servant. I can't even read most of these words on your contract. So learn. You have a month. Drake stood, leaving the paper on the cot beside her. Think about it, but think fast. The council meets tomorrow to set the parameters for the wisdom trial. If you want any chance of passing it, you need to start preparing now. He moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, what you did for Fenris, stopping the fight when you realized he was dying, that took courage. The old Supremes, the ones who built this place, they would have approved. How is he, Fenris? Drake's expression darkened. Alive. Barely. Maruk abandoned him the moment he yielded. Left him to die in the healer's tent. My people are caring for him now. Why? He's not your responsibility. No, but he's 15 years old and dying because someone saw him as disposable. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's destroying the Ridge. Drake opened the door. Get some rest, Kael Varen. Tomorrow the real fight begins. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Kael lay back on the cot, staring at the contract she couldn't fully read, thinking about impossible trials and thrones that spoke, and a boy who'd been taught his only value was in how he died. The throne's power stirred in her chest, quieter now, almost satisfied. What do you want from me? She whispered to it. No answer. Not in words. But deep in her bones, in that place where the throne's presence lived, she felt something that might have been purpose. The door burst open, not Drake. Guards. 4 of them, in council livery, swords drawn. Kael Varen, by order of the High Council, you're under arrest. Kael sat up, ignoring the screaming protest from her ribs. Arrest? For what? Suspicion of witchcraft, use of forbidden magic, conspiracy with enemy forces. The lead guard stepped forward. The council has voted. You're to be held in the black cells until a formal tribunal can be convened. The black cells. Kael had heard stories, deep underground where they kept the truly dangerous prisoners, where people went in and didn't come out. The throne chose me, Kael said, trying to keep her voice steady. You can't. The throne's judgment is under investigation. Now come quietly, or we drag you. Kael looked past them, through the open door, hoping to see Drake, but the corridor was empty. She was alone. The guards moved forward, and Kael realized with cold certainty that this had all been planned. The trial, the intervention, Drake's offer, all of it leading to this moment. They'd let her win just enough to seem legitimate, then they'd use that legitimacy against her. One of the guards reached for her arm. The throne's power exploded outward like a bomb. Kael didn't direct it, didn't control it. The power simply erupted, slamming the guards backward into the walls with bone-breaking force. The stone cracked. The ceiling groaned, and Kael stood in the center of the chaos, silver light pouring from her skin, her eyes, her mouth. The throne's ancient rage flowing through her like a river of fire. No more, a voice said. Her voice, but deeper, older, carrying 8 centuries of authority. The throne has chosen. The choice stands. Anyone who challenges this challenges the foundation of the Ridge itself. The light faded. The guards lay unconscious or groaning against the walls. And Kael stood alone, her hands shaking, staring at what she'd just done. She'd attacked council guards. That was treason. That was death, regardless of what the throne wanted. Unless she ran. The window was small, but she was small too. Kael grabbed Drake's contract, stuffed it inside her shirt, and climbed. The drop to the courtyard was 20 feet. She hit the ground badly, felt something in her ankle give, but the throne's power was still humming through her, numbing the pain. She ran. Through corridors she'd cleaned 1,000 times, past servants who pressed themselves against walls, their eyes wide with terror. Kael didn't stop, couldn't stop. Behind her, alarm bells began to ring. She burst out into the main courtyard, just as guards poured out of the barracks. Ahead was the main gate, already closing, the portcullis dropping. Kael wouldn't make it, she knew it, but she ran anyway because stopping meant dying. 10 feet from the gate. 5. The portcullis was 3 feet from the ground and dropping fast. Kael dove. She felt the iron bars brush her back as she rolled under, heard them crash into the ground inches behind her. Then she was outside Blackstone Keep, in the twilight streets of Duskfall Ridge proper, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a contract she couldn't read. Behind her, the alarm bells rang louder. Guards would be mobilizing. Hunts would be organized. The throne had chosen her, and now she was a fugitive. Kael limped into an alley, pressing herself into the shadows, her mind racing. 1 month until the wisdom trial. 1 month to learn enough to prove herself worthy. 1 month to survive while every alpha in the Ridge wanted her dead. The throne's power pulsed once, almost reassuring. Kael laughed, a broken, slightly hysterical sound. "This is your plan?" she whispered to the ancient presence in her chest. "Make me run?" No answer. But in the distance, she heard shouts, dogs barking, the hunt beginning. Kael pushed off the wall and moved deeper into the darkness, into the parts of Duskfall Ridge where servants and outcasts lived, where someone invisible might stay that way. At least for a little while. The lower circles smelled like survival, unwashed bodies, spoiled food, desperation thick enough to choke on. Kael pressed herself against the damp stone wall of an abandoned tannery, listening to the dogs getting closer. Her ankle throbbed. The throne's power had receded again, leaving her with nothing but pain and the growing certainty that she'd made a catastrophic mistake. Running made her look guilty. Running confirmed every suspicion the council had. But staying meant the black cells. And the black cells meant she'd never make it to the wisdom trial. The barking grew louder. Kael limped deeper into the building, through rooms that stank of old leather and chemicals, until she found a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for her shoulders. She squeezed inside, pulling a rotted canvas over the opening, and held her breath. Footsteps, multiple sets, then voices. Search it all, every room. She can't have gone far with that injury.
Why are we even bothering? She's just a servant. Let her run. The Ridge will kill her faster than we will. Council's orders.
They want her alive for questioning. Questioning. A bitter laugh. That's what they're calling it now? The footsteps moved through the building. Kael counted heartbeats, 60, 70, 80, before the sounds faded. She waited another 100 beats, then crawled out of the shaft, her clothes soaked with stagnant water and things she didn't want to identify. She needed help, needed somewhere safe. But who would hide a fugitive? Who would risk council wrath for a servant girl who'd gotten too big for her station? Marta. The name came immediately, followed by guilt. Going to Marta meant putting the only person who'd ever cared about her in danger. But Kael had nowhere else. The cook's quarters were on the edge of the lower circles, in a building that housed the keep's senior servants. Kael knew the route, had walked it 1,000 times carrying messages or supplies. But walking it now, as a fugitive in the darkness, every shadow looked like a guard and every sound like pursuit. She made it to Marta's door just as the eastern sky started to pale with pre-dawn light. Kael knocked, 3 quick, 2 slow. The pattern they'd used when Kael was small and had nightmares. Nothing. Then footsteps inside, heavy and cautious. "Who's there?" "It's me," Kael whispered. "Please, I need help." The door opened a crack. Marta's broad face appeared, took in Kael's appearance, and the door swung wide. "Inside! Now!" Kael stumbled into the small room. Marta locked the door behind her, threw the bolt, and pulled the curtain over the window in one smooth sequence that spoke of practice. "You look like death warmed over," Marta said, guiding Kael to the single chair. "Sit before you fall. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else. Shut up and let me look at that ankle." Marta knelt, surprisingly graceful for her size, and began unlacing Kael's boot. "The whole keep's talking about what you did. Attacked council guards, fled custody. They're calling it proof you used dark magic in the arena." "I didn't use magic. The throne—" "I know what the throne did. Half the Ridge saw it." Marta's hands were gentle despite her gruff tone, probing the swollen ankle. "Not broken, badly sprained. You won't be running on it for a few days." "I don't have a few days. The wisdom trial is in a month, and I need to—" "You need to not get caught." Marta stood, moved to a cabinet, and pulled out bandages and a clay pot of something that smelled like pine and mint. "Running was stupid. You know that, right? They were going to lock me in the black cells. So you gave them an excuse to hunt you like an animal instead. Brilliant." Marta began wrapping Kael's ankle with practiced efficiency. "What's your plan now?" Kael pulled Drake's contract from her shirt. It was damp and slightly torn, but the writing was still legible, to someone who could read it. "Alpha Drake offered me this, an alliance, access to books and teachers, but I can't exactly accept it now." Marta took the contract, squinting at the words in the dim light. Her lips moved as she read, and Kael felt a spike of surprise. She'd never known Marta could read. "This is actually not terrible," Marta said slowly. "Drake's offering you real resources, training, protection, though that's implied rather than stated, in exchange for trade concessions and political favor if you survive. Can you read? I wasn't always a cook, girl. I had a life before the keep. Marta folded the contract carefully. This alliance could work, but not if you're a fugitive. You need to clear your name first. How? The council wants me dead. Not all of them. Elder Voss looked shaken after the throne manifested, and some of the alphas are more interested in using you than killing you. Marta tapped the contract. Drake included, Castellan too after that stunt you pulled with Gregor. Even Vex seemed intrigued. 3 out of 7, not exactly overwhelming support. It's 3 more than you had a week ago. Marta finished with the ankle and stood. You need allies, Kael. Real ones. People who have something to gain from your success. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do any of this. Then learn. Marta moved to her bed, knelt, and pulled out a wooden chest from underneath. Inside were books. Not many, but more than Kael had ever seen in one place outside the keep's library. I told you I can't read most, so I'll teach you. We have a month. Marta pulled out a slim volume bound in cracked leather. This is a basic primer on governance. Used to belong to my daughter before things changed. Start here. Kael stared at the book, at Marta. You had a daughter? A long time ago. Different life. Marta's expression closed off, and Kael knew better than to push. Point is, these books might help, but books alone won't save you. You need to understand something fundamental about the Ridge. She sat heavily on the bed, the frame creaking under her weight. The Council, the Alphas, all of them, they're operating under old rules. Rules that say power comes from bloodlines and strength comes from violence. The throne chose you because you represent something different, something that scares them. I don't represent anything. I'm just trying to survive. Exactly. You survive by thinking instead of fighting, by negotiating instead of conquering. That's dangerous to people who built their power on the old ways. Marta leaned forward. You want to pass the wisdom trial? Stop trying to prove you're worthy by their standards. Prove the standards themselves are broken. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Marta, you in there? A man's voice rough with exhaustion. Marta's eyes met Kael's. She jerked her head toward the chest, and Kael understood. Hide. Kael squeezed into the chest, pulling the lid down over herself. Through the gaps in the wood, she could see Marta open the door. Garrett, it's early. Council's got every guard in the Ridge looking for that girl, the elect. The man stepped inside. Kael recognized him as one of the keep's blacksmiths. Heard you were close to her. They'll be questioning you soon. Let them question. I've got nothing to hide. Don't be stupid. They're arresting anyone who helped her. Old Hem the stableman got dragged off an hour ago just for talking about how she won in the arena. Garrett lowered his voice. If you know where she is, you need to turn her in before they decide you're complicit. And if I don't know where she is, then pray they believe you. Garrett left. Marta closed the door and let Kael out of the chest. This is worse than I thought, Marta said quietly. They're making examples, trying to isolate you. Then I need to leave. Go somewhere outside the Ridge. There is nowhere outside the Ridge, not for hundreds of miles. You die in the wilderness long before reaching another settlement. Marta paced, her mind clearly working. No, running farther just delays the inevitable. You need to flip this. Flip what? The narrative. Right now, you're a fugitive, a criminal who attacked guards and fled justice. That's the story the Council's telling, and every hour you hide, that story gets stronger. Marta stopped pacing, her eyes sharp. You need to tell a different story. I don't understand. The throne chose you. It manifested to protect you. Those are facts the Council can't erase, but they're trying to bury those facts under accusations of witchcraft and treason. Marta grabbed Kael's shoulders. What if instead of hiding, you went public? What if you challenged the Council directly? Kael's stomach dropped. That's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only move they won't expect. Marta's grip tightened. Think about it. You're not some noble playing political games. You're a servant. The people in the lower circles, the workers, the ones everyone ignores. They're watching this. They saw you in the arena, saw you win against impossible odds, saw the throne itself choose you.
So what? They can't vote. They have no power. They have numbers. And right now the council is terrified that those numbers might start to matter.
Marta released her.
The ridge works because the people at the bottom accept being at the bottom. But what happens when they see someone like them, someone from the bottom, sitting on the throne?
Kael's mind raced. It was insane. Confronting the council would get her killed, but hiding would also get her killed, just slower.
How would I even do this? I can't just walk into the keep.
No, but you can walk into the market square tomorrow at noon when it's packed with workers on their meal break, and you can speak. Marta's eyes gleamed. Tell them your side. Tell them the throne chose you and the council is trying to kill you for it. Tell them you're not running because you're guilty. You're running because the trial was rigged from the start.
They'll arrest me the moment I show my face.
Probably, but not before you've spoken. Not before every worker in that square has heard you.
Marta moved to the window, looking out at the lightning sky.
And once they've heard you, once that story is out there, it becomes much harder for the council to make you quietly disappear. Kael's hands were shaking. This was madness. Complete suicidal madness. But it was also the first thing that felt like a choice instead of a reaction.
I'll need help, she said slowly. People who can spread word that I'm speaking. Make sure the square is full.
I know people. Servants talk to servants. We're invisible to the nobles, but we're everywhere.
Marta smiled grimly. We can fill that square.
And after I speak, when the guards come,
that's when you make them an offer they can't refuse.
Marta pulled out Drake's contract again.
You publicly accept this alliance, in front of witnesses. That forces Drake to either honor it or look like a coward who abandoned his ally. And if Drake honors it, he has to demand a fair trial.
You're assuming Drake will play along. I'm assuming Drake is smart enough to see an opportunity when it presents itself. Marta handed her the contract. He offered this because he thinks you can hold the ridge together. Well, tomorrow you show him he was right to think that. Kael looked at the contract, at the words she could barely read, at the future it promised if she could somehow survive the present.
Teach me to read this, she said.
I have until noon tomorrow. I need to know exactly what I'm agreeing to.
Marta smiled, a real smile, the first Kael had seen from her in years. Then we'd better get started. They worked through the day and into the night. Marta taught and Kael absorbed, her mind desperate and focused in a way formal schooling had never made it. The contract wasn't as complex as she'd feared. Drakey had written it in straightforward terms, probably anticipating she'd struggle with legal language. But understanding the words and understanding the implications were different things.
This clause here, Kael said, pointing, it says Ironwood gets preferential trade status. What does that actually mean? It means Drake's merchants get first pick of goods moving through ridge routes, and they pay lower tariffs than other territories. Marta traced the line with her finger. It's a significant economic advantage. He's betting that advantage is worth the risk of backing you. And this part about mutual defense obligations? If someone attacks you, he's required to defend you. If someone attacks Ironwood, you're required to defend him. It binds you together militarily. Kael set down the contract, rubbing her eyes. The words swam on the page after hours of study. I'm trading away things I don't even have yet. Power I might never get. That's how alliances work. You promise future value in exchange for present support. Marta stood, stretching her back.
Get some sleep. You'll need to be sharp tomorrow. I can't sleep. I'm too... You'll sleep because I'm telling you to. And because collapsing from exhaustion in the middle of your grand speech would somewhat undermine the effect. Marta pointed to her bed. 2 hours. I'll wake you. Kael wanted to argue, but her body was already shutting down. She collapsed onto Marta's bed and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She dreamed of the throne. Not the physical seat, but the presence. Vast and ancient and utterly certain. In the dream, it showed her things. Memories of past supreme, some brilliant and some terrible, all of them chosen for reasons that only became clear in hindsight. The ridge needs what you are, the present said, not what you might become, what you already are. I'm nothing, Kael replied. I'm a servant who got lucky. Luck is another word for opportunity meeting preparation. You have been preparing your entire life. You simply didn't know it. Kael woke to Marta shaking her shoulder. The room was dark. Full night now. It's time. We need to move you while the streets are empty. Kael sat up, her body stiff and aching. Where are we going? Safe house, one of the old storage cellars near the market square. You'll wait there until noon tomorrow. Marta handed her a bundle. Clean clothes. Can't have you looking like a drowned rat when you address the masses. They slipped out into the night, moving through alleys and service corridors Kael knew by heart. They passed other figures in the darkness. Servants on late shifts, workers heading home, people who lived in the invisible spaces of the ridge. Some of them recognized Kael. She saw it in the way their eyes widened, the way they stepped back or forward, uncertain. But none of them raised an alarm. The safe house was exactly what Marta had described. A cellar that had once stored grain, now mostly empty except for rats and the smell of old wheat. Marta lit a candle stub and set it on an overturned crate. I'll send word. By noon tomorrow, every servant and worker who can get away will be in that square. Marta moved to the door, then paused. Kael? What you're about to do, it's going to change things. The ridge won't be the same after tomorrow, regardless of what happens to you. I know. Do you, though? Because once you speak, once you challenge the old order publicly, there's no going back. Even if the council somehow forgives you, even if you pass the trials and become supreme, people will remember that you were willing to burn it all down. That makes you dangerous. I'm already dangerous, the throne made sure of that. Marta smiled. Fair enough. Get some rest. Tomorrow we find out if the ridge is ready for someone like you. She left, locking the door from the outside for safety. Kael sat in the darkness, the contract clutched in her hands, and tried to prepare words for a speech she didn't know how to give. How did you tell people to believe in you when you barely believed in yourself? The throne's power stirred, and this time Kael felt something almost like encouragement. You survived the arena by being yourself, it whispered. Do the same tomorrow. Kael closed her eyes and tried to find the courage somewhere in the exhausted, terrified girl who'd once been invisible. She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, there was pounding on the cellar door. Kael, it's time, Marta's voice. Kael stood, her ankle protesting but holding, and opened the door. Sunlight streamed in. The noise of the city filled the alley. Hundreds of voices. Movement. Life. The square's packed, Marta said, slightly out of breath. I've never seen it this full. Word spread faster than I expected. They're waiting for you. Kael's stomach tried to climb out through her throat. What if I can't do this? Then you'll die having tried something brave instead of dying while hiding in a cellar. Seems like an upgrade to me. Marta handed her a cloak. Keep your head covered until you're ready. And Kael, whatever happens, I'm proud of you. Kael blinked back sudden tears. Thank you for everything. Thank me by not dying stupidly. They moved through the crowds. Kael kept her head down, the hood pulled low, but she could feel the energy in the air. Anticipation. Tension. The feeling of something about to break. The market square opened up before them. Easily 1,000 people packed in. Maybe more. Workers in rough clothes, servants still wearing keep livery. Merchants who'd closed their stalls to watch. And around the edges, trying to look inconspicuous, council guards. At least 50 of them, all armed. They're here for you, Marta murmured. The moment you show yourself, they'll move. Then I'd better talk fast. Kael pushed through the crowd toward the center, where a stone fountain provided a natural platform. People parted as she moved, and she could feel recognition rippling outward. Whispers, gasps. She reached the fountain, climbed up onto the edge. The crowd pressed closer, faces upturned, waiting. Kael threw back her hood. The response was immediate, shocked exclamations, excited chatter, and from the guards, sharp commands to move in. People of Duskfall Ridge! Kael's voice cracked on the first word, but she pushed through. My name is Kael Varen, and the throne chose me! The crowd erupted. The guards started pushing through, but the mass of bodies slowed them. They're calling me a criminal, Kael continued, her voice getting stronger. They say I used dark magic. They say I attacked guards and fled justice. And maybe I did attack guards, when they came to drag me to the black cells without a trial, when they decided the throne's choice didn't matter because I wasn't born into the right family.
More voices joining hers now, angry agreement rippling through the crowd. I'm a servant. I know what it's like to be invisible, to be told your life doesn't matter because you weren't born with the right bloodline. Kael's hands were shaking, but she kept going. The throne looked at all of us, nobles and warriors and wealthy merchants, and it chose a girl who scrubs floors. What does that tell you about what this ridge really needs? A roar of approval. The guards were close now, maybe 20 feet away. I'm not asking you to fight for me, Kael shouted. I'm asking you to believe that change is possible, that we don't have to accept a system where some lives matter more than others. The throne saw that possibility. That's why it chose me. Seize her! The guard captain's voice cut through the noise, but the crowd was packed too tight, bodies pressed together, making a wall of flesh that the guards couldn't easily breach without violence. And they weren't willing to start killing innocent workers. Not yet. I accept. Kael pulled out Drake's contract, holding it high. Alpha Ronan Drake of Ironwood offered me an alliance, and I accept. Witnesses have heard. The contract is binding. She scanned the crowd, looking for there, near the edge of the square, standing on a merchant's cart for a better view. Ronan Drakey himself. Their eyes met across the sea of people. Kael saw calculation flash across his face, saw him weighing options, measuring risks. Then he smiled. It was a predator's smile, sharp and dangerous, but it was directed at the guards trying to arrest his new ally. Halt! Drake's voice carried across the square, with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. That woman is under Ironwood's protection. By the terms of alliance publicly accepted, any attack on her is an attack on my territory. The guards stopped, uncertain. The captain looked toward the keep, clearly trying to figure out if he had authority to arrest someone under an alpha's protection. Elder Voss appeared on the keep's balcony overlooking the square, flanked by other council members. This is irregular, Voss called down. The alliance hasn't been properly ratified by... The alliance was offered, accepted, and witnessed by 1,000 people, Drake shot back. Unless the council wants to argue that public contracts aren't binding, that would make for interesting conversation with every merchant in the ridge. Voss's face went pale. He knew the trap. Invalidating Kael's contract meant invalidating every public agreement ever made in the ridge. The economic chaos would be catastrophic. The elect is still accused of crimes, Voss said carefully. Crimes that must be answered for. Then grant her the trial she's owed, Kael shouted. Not the black cells, not an execution disguised as justice. A real trial, in front of witnesses, where I can defend myself. The crowd roared agreement. Voss looked at the other council members, then at the packed square, then at Ronan Drakey standing with his hand on his sword, clearly prepared to make this very complicated if they tried to arrest Kael by force. Very well, he said, and Kael could hear the defeat in his voice. Kael Varian will be granted a formal tribunal, 3 days hence. Until then, she will be... He paused, choosing words carefully. Held in protective custody. In Alpha Drake's quarters. Under his responsibility. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than the black cells. I accept those terms, Kael said, before anyone could change their mind. Drake pushed through the crowd toward her. When he reached the fountain, he offered his hand. The third time now, Kael noted. She took it. He pulled her down from the fountain and immediately moved to shield her with his body as the guards finally broke through the crowd. She's under my protection, Drakey said calmly. If you want to take her, you'll have to go through me and my entire territory. Is that really how you want this to play out? The guard captain hesitated, then stepped back. 3 days until the tribunal. She doesn't leave your sight until then. Understood. Drake led Kael through the crowd, his warriors materializing from somewhere to form a protective cordon. The people reached out as she passed, touching her cloak, her hands, whispering blessings and prayers and desperate hopes. Kael felt the weight of all those hopes settling on her shoulders like a physical thing. They made it back to the keep, to Drake's quarters, and only then did he release her arm. That, he said slowly, was either the stupidest or the smartest thing I've ever witnessed. I genuinely can't decide which. Kael sank into a chair, her legs finally giving out. Did it work? You turned yourself from a fugitive into a symbol in about 5 minutes. You forced the council to grant you a trial they didn't want to give. You maneuvered me into a public alliance I offered privately. Drake poured 2 glasses of something amber and handed her one. Yes, Kael, it worked. So what happens now? Now we prepare for your tribunal. They'll try to prove you're unfit. We need to prove you're not only fit, but necessary. Drake sat across from her. The wisdom trial is supposed to come after the tribunal, but I suspect the council will try to combine them. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. How do we prepare? We teach you everything a Supreme needs to know. Territory management, trade agreements, conflict resolution, military strategy. Drake ticked them off on his fingers. You have 3 days? That's impossible. Yes, but we're going to do it anyway. He leaned forward. Because here's what you need to understand, Kael. What you did today, that speech in the square, you just declared war on the old order. They can't let you win now. If you win, it proves everything they've built is founded on lies. Then how do I win? By being exactly what the throne saw in you. Not a warrior or a noble or a merchant, a survivor who knows how to see people instead of just using them. Drake finished his drink. The tribunal will be brutal. They'll try to humiliate you, expose your ignorance, make you look foolish. Your job is to turn every attack into proof that the system itself is broken. Kael thought about Marta's words. Prove the standards themselves are wrong. I can do that, she said quietly. I know you can. That's why I offered the alliance. Drake stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start your education. And Kael, what you did today, standing up in that square knowing they might kill you, that took real courage, the kind that can't be taught. He left her alone in the room. Kael sat in the growing darkness, thinking about the 1,000 faces in the square, about the hope she'd seen in their eyes. Hope she'd put there. The responsibility was terrifying. But for the first time since sitting on that cursed throne, Kael felt something other than fear. She felt purpose. The throne's power hummed in agreement, and somewhere deep in her chest, Kael thought she felt it smile. 3 days until the tribunal. 3 days to learn what she needed to survive. 3 days until she either changed the Ridge forever or died trying. Kael pulled out Drake's contract, her contract now, and began to read it again, determined to understand every word. Because if she was going to burn down the old world, she needed to know exactly what she was building in its place. The tribunal chamber had been built for intimidation. High stone walls, narrow windows that let in just enough light to see faces but not enough to feel warmth, and a raised platform where the 7 alphas sat in judgment like ancient kings deciding the fate of peasants. Kael stood in the center of the floor, alone. No chair, no table, just her and the weight of every eye in the room. The 3 days of preparation felt simultaneously like forever, and not nearly enough time. Drake had drilled her relentlessly. History, law, territory management, trade agreements. Her head was stuffed with information she barely understood, and now she was supposed to use it to prove she deserved to live. The gallery was packed, nobles in the front rows, common folk crammed in the back, standing room only. Kael spotted Marta near the rear, her face carefully neutral. Gregor the pit fighter was there too, arms crossed, watching with professional interest. And in a shadowed corner, barely visible, she thought she saw Fenris, the boy who'd nearly died in the arena, pale but alive. This tribunal is convened, Elder Voss announced from his position beside the Alphas' platform, to determine the fitness of Kael Varen to continue as elect. The charges are as follows: use of forbidden magic, assault on council guards, flight from lawful custody, and conspiracy to undermine the established order. Those are crimes punishable by death, Thorne added, leaning forward with barely concealed eagerness. Each one individually. Together, they paint a picture of someone fundamentally unsuited to leadership. I didn't use forbidden magic, Kael said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. The throne's power acted through me. If that's forbidden, then the throne itself is breaking the law. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The throne is not on trial here, Marok said coldly. You are. Then perhaps it should be. Kael took a breath, remembering Drake's coaching. Turn their attacks into questions about the system. If the throne's choice can be overruled by this council, what's the point of having a throne at all? Why not just have the alphas vote among themselves and save everyone the trouble? Because tradition demands, Castellan started. Tradition demanded the throne choose, Kael interrupted. It chose. You didn't like the choice, so now you're looking for reasons to invalidate it. That's not tradition. That's just refusing to accept an outcome you didn't want. Thorn's hand slammed on the table. You dare lecture us on tradition? You, who have lived all of 17 years? Who spent those years scrubbing floors? Yes, I scrubbed floors. I also watched, listened, learned how this place actually works, not how you pretend it works. Kael turned to address the gallery as much as the alphas. I saw nobles' sons get positions they weren't qualified for because of their names. Saw warriors promoted based on who their fathers were, not whether they could actually lead. Saw merchants by influence while talented people with the wrong bloodlines got ignored. You're describing civilization, Vex said dismissively. Systems require hierarchy. Some people lead, others follow. That's natural order. Natural order. Kael felt something click into place, the argument she'd been searching for during 3 sleepless nights. If it's natural for the strong to lead, why do you need bloodlines? Why does it matter who your parents were if you're strong enough to lead on your own merit? Silence. Vex's eyes narrowed. Unless, Kael continued, pressing the advantage, it's not about strength at all. It's about maintaining power in the hands of people who already have it. Bloodlines aren't about finding the best leaders. They're about making sure leadership stays in the same families, whether those families produce good leaders or not. This is seditious talk, Marok growled. This is honest talk, which I realize might be unfamiliar. Kael looked directly at him. How many of your territory's positions are held by people who earned them versus people who inherited them? How many talented workers are stuck in servant positions because they don't have the right last names? Enough! Castellan's voice cut through the rising tension. The elect is attempting to deflect from her crimes by attacking the foundation of Ridge society. We're not here to debate political philosophy. We're here to determine if she assaulted guards and fled custody. I'll stipulate to both, Kael said. I did attack guards who came to imprison me without trial. I did flee when they tried to drag me to the black cells. And I'd do it again because the alternative was dying in a hole without ever getting to defend myself. You admit to the crimes? Voss looked genuinely shocked. I admit to the actions. I dispute that they're crimes. Self-defense isn't criminal. Fleeing unjust imprisonment isn't criminal. What's criminal is a council that decided I was guilty before giving me a chance to speak. We gave you the arena, Thorn said. You passed the strength trial. Barely. And only because the throne itself intervened, which brings us back to the central question. If the throne chose me, if it manifested to protect me, why are you still trying to kill me? Because the throne can be wrong. The words burst out of Thorn like they'd been held back too long. History is full of bad supremes who destroyed territories, started wars, ruined lives. The throne isn't infallible. It's just old. Finally, the admission Kael had been waiting for. So the throne can be wrong, she said softly, which means you don't actually trust it. You just use it as a tool to legitimize decisions you've already made. When it chooses someone you like, the throne is sacred and infallible. When it chooses someone you don't like, suddenly it's fallible and needs to be overruled. She turned to the gallery, speaking louder now. This isn't about whether I'm fit to lead. It's about whether they're willing to accept a leader they didn't choose. And the answer is clearly no. So let's stop pretending this is a fair trial and admit what it really is. A powerful group of people protecting their power by eliminating a threat to the system that gives them that power. The gallery erupted. Nobles shouting denials, commoners shouting agreement, the noise building to a roar. Order! Voss slammed his staff against the floor. This tribunal will maintain order. Then let's maintain some honesty too, Ronan Drake said, standing from his position in the gallery. The elect makes a valid point. We claim to honor the throne's choice, while simultaneously trying to invalidate it. We can't have it both ways. You would defend her, Vex said. You have an alliance. You benefit from her survival. I benefit from stability, Drake corrected. The Ridge is fracturing. We all know it. Without a supreme, we'll be at civil war within a year. The throne offered us a solution, and we're rejecting it because we don't like how young she is or where she came from. She has no training, Marok protested. Then train her. That's what the trials are supposed to be for, testing and teaching. Instead, we threw her in an arena and hoped she'd die quickly. Drake's voice was ice. I watched those fights. I watched a 15-year-old boy nearly burn himself to death because you, Alpha Marok, conditioned him to see his only value in how he served you. That's not leadership. That's exploitation. Merrick's face went dark with rage, but he didn't deny it. The wisdom trial, Castellan interjected, clearly trying to redirect. We still have the wisdom trial. Let's conduct it now. Give the elect a chance to prove she has the judgment necessary to lead. Fine, Thorne said. Let's see what the servant knows about actually governing. Voss looked uncertain, but nodded. Very well. The wisdom trial will consist of 3 scenarios. The elect must provide solutions that demonstrate sound judgment, strategic thinking, and understanding of Ridge law and customs. He unrolled a scroll, reading from prepared questions. First scenario, 2 territories dispute a border. Both claim historical right to the land. Both have armed forces ready to fight. How do you resolve it? Kael's mind raced. This was exactly the kind of question Drake had prepared her for. The obvious answer was to study the historical claims, but that would take months, and probably not satisfy either side. I don't resolve it, Kael said. Murmurs of confusion. I don't resolve it because it's the wrong question. If 2 territories are ready to go to war over a border dispute, the border isn't the real problem. Something deeper is wrong, maybe resource scarcity, maybe old grudges. Maybe one territory feels threatened by the other. Kael took a breath. So instead of arbitrating the border dispute, I'd ask what both territories actually need. Maybe the border is near a water source, and both sides need access. Solution: shared access rights. Maybe it's about pride and saving face. Solution: symbolic concessions that let both sides claim victory. The point is, you can't resolve conflict by just picking a side. You resolve it by addressing the underlying needs. Silence. Then Castellan slowly nodded. Practical. Not traditional, but practical. Second scenario, Voss continued, though he sounded less confident now. A wealthy merchant is accused of cheating workers out of wages. The merchant claims the workers agreed to their payment. The workers claim they were coerced. You have no clear evidence either way. What do you do? Another scenario Drake had covered, but his answer had been about investigating thoroughly and following legal procedures. Kael decided to go a different direction. I ask the merchant to live on a worker's wage for 1 month. If he agrees and completes the month, I rule in his favor. If he refuses or can't complete it, I rule for the workers. The gallery stirred. Thorne leaned back, looking grudgingly impressed. That's actually clever, he admitted. If the merchant can't survive on the wage he's paying, it proves the wage is inadequate. If he can, it proves the workers are lying or the wage is fair. It also, Kael added, forces the merchant to understand what he's asking of his workers. Even if I rule in his favor, he'll probably treat them better afterward. Third scenario, Voss said, and now his voice was careful, measured. The most difficult. You are supreme. One of the territorial alphas is clearly planning rebellion. You have evidence but not absolute proof. If you accuse them without proof, you risk looking paranoid and weak. If you wait for absolute proof, they might strike first. What do you do? The room went quiet. This wasn't a theoretical question. This was real, the kind of situation Supremes had faced throughout history, and often handled badly. Kael thought about every lesson Drake had taught her, every story Marta had shared, every observation she'd made watching power play out in the keep. I bring them into the inner circle, she said finally. What? Marek looked stunned. If an alpha is planning rebellion, it's because they feel threatened or excluded. So I include them. Give them responsibilities that make them invested in the system's success. Make them part of the solution instead of the problem. Kael met the alphas' eyes. People don't rebel when they have power. They rebel when they feel powerless. So instead of trying to crush a potential enemy, I'd try to turn them into an ally. That's naive, Vex said. Some people want power for its own sake. They'll take your trust and use it against you. Maybe, but crushing them guarantees they become an enemy. Trying to include them at least leaves the possibility of alliance. And if it doesn't work, if they do betray that trust, then everyone sees I gave them a chance. The moral high ground matters when you're trying to justify putting down a rebellion. Castellan was nodding now, his merchant's mind clearly working through the calculation. It's a risk, but it's a calculated risk with potential upside. That's the foundation of good strategy. Voss set down his scroll. The elect has completed the wisdom trial. The council will now deliberate. Wait, Kael said. I have a question for the council. Every alpha turned to stare at her. The trials are supposed to test me, but they also reveal something about you, about this system. Kael took a step forward. You threw me in an arena hoping I'd die. When I didn't, you tried to arrest me without trial. When I demanded a trial, you stacked it against me. At every turn, you've tried to eliminate me rather than actually test whether I could lead. Your point? Thorn growled. My point is that a system that fights this hard to prevent change is a system that's afraid of what change might reveal. You're not protecting the ridge, you're protecting your positions in it. Kael looked at each alpha in turn. The throne chose me because I represent something you can't offer. A ridge where people matter more than bloodlines, where leadership is earned instead of inherited, where we actually solve problems instead of just maintaining the status quo until everything collapses. You think you can create that? Vex asked. You think one person can change 8 centuries of tradition? No, I think a lot of people can change it if they're given the chance. I'm just the one the throne picked to start. Kael took a breath. So here's my question. Are you going to keep fighting the throne's choice? Or are you going to accept that maybe, just maybe, the old ways aren't working anymore? The silence that followed was absolute. Then Ronan Drake stood. I vote to confirm Kael Varen as Supreme Elect. She has passed both trials with insight and courage. More importantly, she's demonstrated the kind of thinking the Ridge needs if we're going to survive the next decade. Seconded, Castellan said immediately. Though I do so with reservations. But reservations about an uncertain future are better than certainties about decline. 2 votes. They needed 4 out of 7. Vex studied Kael for a long moment. I vote to confirm. Not because I like her or her ideas, but because the throne chose her, and I'm not arrogant enough to think I know better than 8 centuries of tradition. 3. I vote against, Thorn said flatly. The girl has potential, I'll grant that. But potential isn't qualification. She's too young, too inexperienced, too willing to tear down systems without understanding what holds them together. Against, Merrick agreed, for much the same reasons. 3-4-2 against. 2 votes left. The remaining council members who'd been silent until now. Elder Voss stood slowly. As record keeper, I have access to every Supreme's history. I've read about bold ones and cautious ones, brilliant ones and foolish ones, and I've noticed a pattern. The throne doesn't always choose the person we expect or even the person who seems most qualified. It chooses the person the Ridge needs at that specific moment in history. He paused, looking at Kael. I believe we are at a crossroads. The old systems are failing. Territory loyalty is fracturing. The gap between rich and poor has never been wider. We need someone who can bridge those divides, who understands both the bottom and the top of Ridge society. He took a breath. I vote to confirm. 4 votes. Kael felt her knees go weak. The last council member was a woman Kael barely knew, Alpha Saren of the Coastal Holdings, who'd been silent throughout the entire tribunal. I abstain, she said quietly. You can't abstain, Merrick protested. This requires a decision. I can abstain because I genuinely don't know if she's ready, but I also don't know if any of us were ready when we took power. Leadership isn't about being ready. It's about rising to the moment. Saren looked at Kael. So I abstain, and I let the majority decide. 4 votes is enough. Voss struck his staff against the floor. The vote stands at 4 in favor, 2 against, 1 abstention. By the authority vested in this council, I declare Kael Varen has passed both the strength and wisdom trials. She is confirmed as Supreme Elect and will undergo the final trial, leadership, over the course of the next 6 months. During that time, she will serve as Provisional Supreme with full council oversight. The gallery erupted, some in celebration, some in outrage, but the noise was deafening. Kael stood frozen, not quite believing it was over, not quite believing she'd won. Drake was suddenly beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Breathe, he said quietly. You're not dying. You're allowed to breathe.
Kael sucked in air, realized she'd been holding her breath for the last minute. I did it, she whispered. You did it. What happens now? Now? Drake smiled. Now the real work begins. The days that followed were chaos. Kael was moved to the Supreme's chambers, rooms she'd cleaned 100 times but never imagined occupying. A staff was assigned to her. Advisors appeared offering help that came with strings attached.
Every alpha wanted a private audience, wanted to establish their relationship with the new power center. It was overwhelming, exhausting, terrifying. And Kael loved it. Not the politics or the manipulation or the endless meetings, but the work. The actual work of trying to make the Ridge function better. Her first official act was to establish a merit-based promotion system in the Keep's staff. Servants could now qualify for better positions through demonstrated skill rather than just seniority or connections. It was a small change, but the response was immediate. Workers who'd been invisible for years suddenly had hope. Her second act was to create a council position for a representative elected by the workers and common folk. The Alphas hated it, but Kael had coalition votes from Drake, Castellan, and Vex, enough to pass it over objections. Slowly, carefully, she began to reshape the Ridge. There was resistance. Of course there was. Thorn tried to undermine her at every turn. Marek spread rumors about her incompetence. Small rebellions broke out in territories that refused to accept a servant supreme. But there was also support. Workers rallied to her. Young nobles tired of the old ways began to see possibility. And gradually, grudgingly, even some of the old guards started to admit that maybe change wasn't synonymous with collapse. 6 months after the tribunal, Kael stood in the grand hall for the final vote. The leadership trial was over. The council would now vote on whether to confirm her as supreme permanently or strip her title and start over. The gallery was packed again. But this time, Kael wasn't standing alone on the floor. She stood on the dais beside the throne. The vote went 5 in favor, 2 against. Seren had finally chosen a side, joining the majority. Only Thorn and Murrock held out. But even they couldn't argue with the results. Territory disputes were down, trade was up, and for the first time in years, the Ridge felt like it was moving forward instead of just surviving. Kael Varen, Voss announced. By the authority of this council and the will of the throne, you are confirmed as Supreme of Duskfall Ridge. This time when Kael sat on the throne, it didn't erupt with power. It simply settled around her like a familiar coat, warm and certain and right. The crowd erupted in cheers. Later, after the ceremonies and celebrations, after the last well-wisher had left and the halls had gone quiet, Kael found herself alone in the Supreme's study. A knock at the door. Marta entered without waiting for permission, carrying a tray with tea and bread. Thought you might be hungry, the cook said, setting it down. You barely touched the feast. Too many people watching me eat. Felt weird. Kael smiled. Thank you for everything. I wouldn't have survived without you. You would have. You're stronger than you think. Marta poured tea with the same steady hands that had fed Kael as a child. Your mother would be proud. Kael looked up sharply. My mother? You knew her? Not well, but I knew of her. She was a servant in the keep like you. Died giving birth to you in a snowstorm, trying to reach the healers. Marta's expression was sad. I found you wrapped in her cloak, brought you to the keep, gave you a name because she never got to. Tears burned Kael's eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Because you didn't need to know you came from nothing. You needed to know you could become something. Marta touched Kael's shoulder gently. Your mother's name was Ilara. She was brave and kind and stubborn as hell, just like her daughter. Kael wiped at her eyes. Ilara Varen, I like that. So did she. Marta moved toward the door, then paused. You're going to do good things here, Kael. The Ridge is lucky to have you. After Marta left, Kael sat at the Supreme's desk and pulled out a piece of parchment. She wrote slowly, carefully, using the reading and writing skills she'd acquired through desperate necessity. First official decree as Supreme. Establish a school in the lower circles. All children, regardless of family status, will have access to education. No more invisible people. No more wasted potential. She signed it with her full name, Kael Ilara Varen, Supreme of Duskfall Ridge. The throne's presence hummed in the back of her mind, satisfied. A year passed, then another. The changes Kael implemented took root slowly, but they took root. The ridge didn't transform overnight into some perfect utopia. There were still problems, still conflicts, still people who resisted change. But it was better, measurably, tangibly better. Workers' children attended schools. Merit-based promotions became standard. Territory disputes were resolved through negotiation more often than violence. And slowly the idea that bloodlines determined worth began to fade. Kael stood on the keep's battlements one evening, looking out over Duskfall Ridge as the sun set. Ronan Drake joined her as he often did these days. Their alliance had deepened into friendship, and if there were rumors about it becoming something more, well, Kael had learned to ignore the less important rumors. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Drake asked. "Thinking about how strange it is. A year ago, I was scrubbing floors. Now I'm making decisions that affect thousands of lives. Having regrets? No. But sometimes I miss being invisible. Things were simpler when no one noticed me. Simpler, but not better." Drake looked out over the ridge. "You've changed this place, Kael. Given people hope that change is possible. That's worth the complexity. I couldn't have done it without you, without Marta, Castellan, Vex, even Voss." Kael smiled. "Turns out leadership isn't about being strong enough to do everything alone. It's about being smart enough to accept help." "Look at you, growing wise in your old age. I'm 19, you ass, ancient by servant standards." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the ridge settle into evening. Lights flickered on in the lower circles. More lights than there used to be, because more people could afford candles now that wages were fairer. "The throne was right," Kael said softly. "I didn't understand it at the time. Still not sure I fully understand it now. But it was right to choose me." "Because you're a brilliant strategist?" "No, because I was invisible long enough to see how the system actually worked. Long enough to understand what needed to change." Kael turned to face Drake. "The throne didn't choose me despite being a servant. It chose me because I was a servant, because someone who'd lived at the bottom would never forget what it felt like, would never stop fighting to make sure others didn't have to stay there." Drake nodded slowly. "The throne chooses what the ridge needs, and right now we needed someone who understood that power should serve people, not the other way around." Below them, in the market square where Kael had once made her desperate speech, a group of children played in the fading light. Some were nobles' children, some were workers' children, but playing together, they were just children. That was new. That mattered. Kael thought about the girl she'd been. Invisible, overlooked, considered worthless by everyone who mattered. Thought about the journey from scrubbing floors to sitting on a throne. It hadn't been smooth, hadn't been easy. She'd been terrified more often than not, improvising constantly, making mistakes and learning from them. But she'd survived, more than survived. She'd changed the world she lived in, proven that the unwanted and underestimated could reshape reality if given the chance. The throne's power pulsed once in her chest, warm and approving. "Thank you," Kael whispered to it. To her mother, who'd died giving her life. To Marta, who'd given her a name. To everyone who'd believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. "What was that?" Drake asked. "Nothing, just acknowledging some debts." "The Supreme doesn't have debts. The Supreme has responsibilities." "Then I'm acknowledging my responsibilities." Kael straightened, taking one last look at the ridge spread out below. "Come on, we have work to do. The council meets tomorrow and Thorne's going to fight the education funding again." "He always does." "And I'll convince Castellan to side with me by showing him the economic projections. Educated workers are more productive. He'll vote for his pocket, if not his principles." Cynical. Practical. Kael grinned. "I'm learning." They walked back inside together, leaving the battlements empty. Behind them, the sun finally set over Duskfall Ridge. But in the lower circles, in the schools and meeting halls and homes where hope had taken root, lights burned bright against the coming darkness. And in the grand hall, the ancient throne waited patiently, knowing it had chosen well. The girl no one had seen had become the woman everyone followed, not because she was the strongest or the smartest or the most qualified, but because she'd been invisible long enough to see the truth everyone else had missed, that the measure of a leader wasn't where they came from, but what they did with the power they'd been given. And Kael Varen, once a servant, now supreme, had used that power to ensure no one would ever have to be invisible again.